Welcome back to our unit on linguistics. I don't know if you remember, last time we talked a little bit about how language informs the way we think and how we would think without language, and how our minds are influenced by language. Today I want to build on those ideas. We're going to talk about how our speaking and writing our language reflects our personal identity and even influences and shapes who we are, our personal identity. And at the end of today, I'm hoping that you guys will be able to compose a one-paragraph conclusion about how language informs your identity or the identity of people around you. So if you haven't done this Canvas activity yet, I want you to pause the video now and go back to Canvas and spend a few minutes responding to each of these questions in 1 to 2 sentences. I especially want you guys to think about the last 2 questions. How do you use and encounter English every day in your life? And what do you remember about our last lesson? So if you haven't done that yet, pause the video and go do it now. Once you're done with that, come on back here. Hopefully you remember some things from our last lesson, especially there was one little part of our last lesson in our podcast that we listened to where they talked about how our identities are entirely based on the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. And this is the idea that I want to build on today. We use language every day for so much. Every single thing that we are able to communicate with other people is a result of language. We text our friends. We probably send 25 emails a day to other students and teachers and parents. And we use it in songs, in movies, in books, road signs, just talking to your friends. You use it totally differently to talk to your friend than you would to your parent. But all of the ways that we communicate really can be broken down into 4 different ways. We send communication and we receive communication. And when we send communication, we can do that verbally by speaking, or we can do it in writing. So that's speaking and writing, and then we receive communication by either listening or readings. And this is actually the 4 strands of English language arts, Common Core or State Core standards that we use: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And it's deceptive, I think, because sometimes I get English language learners who think that this is going to be a class in English, but really this is a class in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And if you can read and write and speak and listen in Spanish or Chinese or Japanese, that's just as valid, even in this classroom, as reading, writing, speaking, and listening in English. So, reading, writing, and speaking and listening are different things than English. I want to do a little activity right now. I want you guys to pull up on your phones the last message that you sent to your friend and the last message that you sent to a parent or authority figure. And I'm going to have, if you're in here in class with me, a few of you share those on the board. So make sure that they're school appropriate. Don't share one that's inappropriate. And if you're online, I'm going to have a place in Canvas where I want you to upload a couple messages. And I think we're going to see some pretty distinct differences in these messages. To your friends, I'm expecting a lot of slang and abbreviations like G2G, got to go, or OMG, or BRB. But to your parent or an authority figure, I don't even know if your mom is going to know what G2G means. And the reason why our communication with different people is different is because our intents in communicating is different. And this is the same as if you're an adult and you go into a job interview, you're going to communicate hopefully very differently than you would with your children around the dinner table that evening. And it doesn't mean that one communication is better or worse. It just means that there's different communications for different situations. And I want you guys to be able to communicate appropriately for all situations by the end of this year, whether that's writing a formal essay or talking to your buddy out in the parking lot. So the study of how we use language socially in different social situations and how language reflects the societies we live in is called sociolinguistics. And when we study sociolinguistics, we are not concerned about what people say. We're not eavesdropping on their Friday night plans. We're more concerned about how they say it, the words they choose to use, and the way they put those words together, and what those things, the way they put words together and the way they use words, can tell us about their social backgrounds and their social intentions and their emotions and their futures. We assume that there's such a thing as good grammar and bad grammar, especially I think English teachers are very guilty of this. You come into my classroom and you say, Miss Nielsen, I went and done rode my horse last weekend up in them there hills. And my natural inclination is to say, oh, I have to correct your English. But it's not a bad way of speaking. Instead of saying, hey, that's terrible grammar, that's bad speaking, I should be listening to say, oh, this is what I know about this student from the way he's speaking. And it's not that you're uneducated or unintelligent. It's that your social background is maybe your family's from southern Utah, or it tells me about your social situation. That's what sociolinguistics is. There are two demographics that have changed the English language more than any other, and that is William Shakespeare. We talked a little bit last time in the podcast about how Shakespeare invents so many words and changes language a lot. And this is what I love about teenage girls, is they are linguistically brilliant. They have changed the English language as a demographic collectively more than William Shakespeare, because they say words like totes and adorbs and epic. I don't know, what other words do you girls use? Anyway, we assume that the way they're using language is bad, but it's just different and new, and it's innovative and exciting. And language has always changed, whether it's Shakespeare changing it or 13-year-old girls. That's just inherent in language, that it changes. And so I don't want us to assume that the way teenage girls talk is unintelligent. There are so many different ways all the time of saying the same thing. Like if I am in a Pride and Prejudice novel, I might say, how do you do? If I'm Mrs. Nielsen greeting you as you come into class, I'm going to say, how are you today? How's it going? I hear you guys say to each other, what's up? And I can't even say it because I feel ridiculous, because that's not me. I know that that's not the way an English teacher should talk. We might say, excuse me, or we might say what? Or we might say, come again. These things have the same referential meaning. How do you do? How are you? What's up? They all mean, how are you doing today? Tell me about your feelings or your emotions or the events of your day. But they have very different social meanings. They tell us about the speaker. This one tells me that you're a teenage boy. This one tells me that you're Mr. Darcy. This one might tell me my husband says come again all the time, and it makes me smile every time because it reminds me that his family's from this little podunk town called Oak City, Utah. So referential meanings and social meanings are very different. Referential meanings mean it doesn't matter what you say, it means the same thing every time. Was up means the same thing, but social meanings are what's called variable. The meaning of them changes. I want to talk about this word like. We assume that the word like means that somebody is kind of a valley girl. They're stupid or unintelligent. They're using the word like as a filler word while they gather their thoughts for a moment or collect their language to communicate. But really, that's not really how they're using like at all. We assume that there's no rules about when to use like, that girls are just throwing this word in whenever they feel like it or whenever they don't know what to say. But actually, they are following very strict, informal, unwritten rules of grammar when they use the word like. The word like, it's a variable word. We use variable words like the same way we use fashion choices. They tell us about the speaker's personality and their intentions. So somebody might choose to say like or totes or adorbs, and it's kind of telling us about their personality, their style, the same way that this man's very handsome jacket is telling us about his style, or this woman's leather jacket is telling us about her style. They're style words. I want you to think of the words that you choose and the way that you talk as a stylistic decision. So, recently, some sociolinguistic researchers decided that they were going to study how people used the word like. And in order to control the variables of their social experiment, they were going to study how a specific group of immigrants used the word like. And the immigrants that they chose were immigrants that spoke a native language that didn't have a word like. There was no filler word that the immigrants used when they didn't know what to say for a minute. So that way they wouldn't be using the word like in the same way that they were using it in their previous language. So they chose a group of Polish immigrants, and then they decided that to control another variable, they would only study Polish immigrants who immigrated to one small community in Ireland. And they were all learning how to speak the Irish English, at the same time in the same little small community. And they studied the word like in this community, and what they found was in this community there were two different ways that locals were using the word like. And the first one was people that had been born and raised in this community were using the word like as a grammar rule, an informal, unwritten grammar rule at the beginning and ending of sentences. They were saying, he's never there, like, or like these things happen. But people who had come from other places or traveled a little or didn't intend to stay in this area of Ireland, they were using like in a more global fashion, the way people across the world tend to use it and the way we use it here in English. In American English, they said things like, he was like way tall, and her tan was like fake. They were using it in the middle of sentences instead of at the beginning or ending. So they put these immigrants into this community and they let them absorb the culture and the words. And what they found was very interesting. They found that immigrants who intended to move on, who were only staying briefly in Ireland as a sort of transition period, used the word like more like the global residents, the people who had lived outside of Ireland or come from other places or were more global travelers. But the immigrants who intended to stay local actually absorbed and used the word like the natives. They were putting it at the beginnings and ends of sentences. And what the researchers determined was that the word like had actually become a part of their identity. If they considered themselves now Irish or members of this or citizens of this small community, then they were using it like the members of the small community, these Irish citizens. And if they were traveling, they had adopted it to fit more their global personal identity. And the local people who used the word like at the beginning of and ending of sentences tended to be male, and they tended to be older. And the people who were using it in the middle of sentences tended to be female, and they tended to be younger. So they had certain aspects of their character and personality and identity that were all part of this, and unwittingly they adopted it to use it like people who were more a part of their own community or who they identified with more closely. There are two activities on Canvas for you to do today. They're both Google Forms. One is a written communication Google form, and one is a verbal communication form. I want you guys to listen, to look at all of those speakers and evaluate their intent, their emotion, or their identity based on what you can observe just from hearing them speak or just from looking at a little piece of their written and spoken communication. And I hope that it will get you thinking about who you are and the impressions that you present when you speak. And this is not to say that you're a bad speaker or that I'm a better speaker than you because I'm an English teacher, or if you're just learning to speak English, that it's not that you're bad at speaking English. It's just that I want you guys to be able eventually to use English in a way that's going to benefit you in different situations. We all do it. I use English one way when I'm talking to Dr. Perkins and a different way when I'm talking to you. And being able to use the right language for the right situation will help you in your life. So please don't assume that I'm intending to devalue your version of English. Please say what's up together all you want in the hallways, in my classroom. And then when you go to a job interview, say, how are you? Okay, so go do the written and spoken communication Google Forms, and then when you're done with that, as an exit ticket, I want you to write one paragraph evaluating based on all the various communication situations you observed today. How do you think communication informs and shapes our identities? And don't forget to hold on to these paragraphs because we're going to use them in our final assessment at the end of the school year.